What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Redonkulous Gaming. Today we're going to talk a topic that has been relatively taboo on this channel because I've avoided it like the plague, simply because it is something that I felt like was going to have a lot of changes over the duration leading up to expansion release, and now that we don't have a release date for expansion, I can say, yep, I was right, this is the way they're going to tune it. However, everyone pretty much thought this anyway, so I didn't exactly go out on a limb. All that being said, this week they have released an update to the beta build that makes it so that every Soulbind only has 2 potency conduits. And what this does is it will drastically change the strength of each covenant by eliminating that third potency socket. You almost felt like you had to go down the path that had all 3 potency sockets to maximize your DPS if you're a tank, maximize your threat output by going the route of potency. You very rarely would go finesse as a tank, just as an example, but you would maybe target endurance. Now what they've done is they have replaced the third potency socket for every soulbind that you have, and they've replaced it with either a finesse or an endurance potency socket. So this means that we are one step closer to seeing some kind of balance, question mark. We're never going to be balanced, guys. I mean, I don't hate to be the one to break the bad news to you, but we're not going to see balance in Shadowlands. That's just not going to be a thing. Every class will have its ebbs and flows along with each and every spec of every class, and that is very much in large part due to the fact that, you know, this soulbind and conduit system is really tough to manage, and it's not necessarily something that Blizzard is just going to be able to set it and forget it. So this, in a big way, is going to help Blizzard balance things going forward to the best of their ability, but this does not mean that we're going to have 100% balance across the board. But I just wanted to make this short video to let you guys know that this is a big step forward for Blizzard by eliminating that third potency conduit. It might not feel good to those who have already gamed the system and done a bunch of testing and planned on certain soulbinds because of the fact that they got access to those potency conduits earlier. Now that they've normalized it, at least for the most part, in terms of having 2 potency sockets, and then the rest are going to be finesse and endurance. That means that the finesse and the endurance ones are more specific to your class, and therefore will not make it so that you have to make each one of your conduits 100% for one set spec, rather for one set game choice. In other words, solo content, raid, or mythic plus. That is kind of the way they want you to think about these soulbinds, and not necessarily have it be spec based. That's not the way this is going to work. If you play more than one spec of any class, you're likely going to have different loadouts for each one of those specs. So even though they're giving you, perceived meaningful choice with this socket change, it's not necessarily going to play out the way that I think Blizzard is going for here. And ultimately, even though you may be, you might have the urge to take a soulbind and have that linked to a certain spec, this certainly gives you a little bit more flexibility, because adding an endurance or a finesse socket is class-based and not necessarily spec-based. But the potency conduits were ultimately what was driving the choices behind the spec and soulbind loadouts to begin with. This will make more sense if you haven't gotten your hands on beta yet. When you start to kind of play with it, you can look on Wowhead and you can kind of see which soulbinds have which loadout for which conduits. They're updating that right now. This was just data mined today as part of the Blizzard changes for the weekly the beta reset here. So this is something that's going to be going live as of actually now in beta, but Wildhead will have something up here shortly, and I'll try to link it in the video below for you guys so you don't have to go searching for it for hours. But ultimately, all this does is it gives you the perception of meaningful choice, when in reality the finesse conduits are not necessarily game changing. They're more quality of life, and the endurance conduits are more survivability. Endurance, exactly what it sounds like. So this is kind of good news for tanks who need to be a little bit more tanky and didn't necessarily care about their damage output, although if you're a tank, I would argue you should very much care about your damage output. But this is just something that is going to give you a little bit more flexibility when it comes to building your soulbinds and your different loadouts per spec. But it's not something that is going to make you feel forced to take whatever path gives you that third potency conduit, because that's exactly what the old system did. So a step in the right direction, Blizz, but we're not quite there yet, and I don't know that we're ever going to be. This is going to be a never-ending battle to get this stuff quote-unquote balanced, but at least this is a step in the right direction. Alright, that wraps up the Soulbinds and the conduit changes for the week. That was a big one. Let's go ahead and jump into some class changes as well as some legendary effects. I'm just going to focus on the tanking changes, if there are any. So just be aware that if you're here for just the overall class view, that's not what you're going to be getting. You're going to be getting the view of classes that have the ability to tank. So let's first start with our Death Knights. And our Death Knight actually saw a legendary item change for the pheromones ability. That was actually nerfed, and that is the ability where you and your minions will gain a haste percentage while you're inside your death and decay, and enemies damaged by your death and decay have a chance to cower in place for 3 seconds. That was nerfed from 10% to 5% haste while you're inside your death and decay, so keep that in mind. Blizzard still playing with the fact that Ossuary is now baseline, which gives you that innate haste when your bone armor is above 6 stacks. So keep in mind that pheromones is not going to be working the same way it was before. There was yet another covenant change to blood DKs that go with the Kyrian covenant. Shackle the Unworthy class skill has been changed yet again. Last week we saw the overall change to the way that it functioned, where it switched away from being able to reduce the cooldown of Shackle the Unworthy to instead being able to kind of chain and jump to new targets. Because of that ability, because of the fact that it can jump onto new targets, Blizzard did nerf the damage that was being done to Shackle the Unworthy, but they also added a new conduit effect to kind of help offset some of this change. So there's going to be some tweaking and some playing around and some testing needed there to figure out exactly what this means to the players who were ideally looking at going Kyrian. So hopefully I'll be able to circle back more on that this week. For our Druid friends out there who like to go and are looking at Necrolords, I unfortunately don't have any good news for the Guardians out there, but it's definitely worth mentioning that Adaptive Swarm was buffed for the balanced Druids. And then for those who are going to find their home in Revendreth, Ravenous Frenzy, the negative effect associated with that, it previously procced after 1.5 seconds idle. It now procs after 2 seconds idle. So if you watched any of my videos around Guardian Druid at all, you'll know that I was a little worried about, skill cap and maybe player ability negatively affecting and the mismanagement of Ravenous Frenzy, to the point where I was worried that as a healer, there's going to be a lot of tanks out there that kept getting the negative effect of Ravenous Frenzy. Blizzard gave everyone an extra half second of breathing room there. I mean, it's really easy to game this negative effect as a Guardian Druid because you can just sit and swipe at nothing if you have nothing to hit. But overall, we can't expect everyone to be able to do that or to fully understand that. But Ravenous Frenzy is pretty darn strong for Guardians right now. It just comes with that negative effect. So a little bit extra breathing room from 1.5 seconds idle now to 2 seconds idle, so you're not going to be hit as quickly with that negative effect as you were before. So that's good news. The Monk did see some legendary changes this week, although nothing that really directly affects Brewmasters, so we'll skip over that. We also saw Weapons of Order buffed. However, that buff is not coming to Brewmasters. It is instead coming to Mistweavers, so there was a flat-out buff there. We also saw a nerf for our Paladin friends out there who are going with Necrolords. This is going to affect the Covenant ability Vanquisher's Hammer. However, it's not a direct nerf to Vanquisher's Hammer. It's actually a nerf to the conduit called Righteous Might, which is only going to now deal 50% increased damage with Vanquisher's Hammer and heal you for the damage done. So that's coming down from 100%, I believe. The last change that I have for you guys is going to affect our warriors. This one is to the legendary effect Seismic Reverberation. Previously, this was an ability that when you're in prot, if you hit with 3 or more enemies, it's going to hit them for 1 additional time with revenge. This is now no longer 100% throughput. Instead, when you hit 3 or more enemies, it still will hit them 1 more time, but only for 30% of the damage that it was previously doing before. So this is a massive change overall. The only spec I should say that this is unchanged for is Fury, and that's if Whirlwind hits 3 or more enemies, it hits them for 1 additional time for 100% damage. Whereas if you look at arms, it's 1 additional time for 60% damage. So Whirlwind or Revenge, when you go prot, now hits for 30% extra damage and hits 1 additional time. So that could make you rethink your legendary effect, although again, we are so far out from release at this point in time, don't go panicking just yet.